I want to take you guys back to a cold winter evening in a small town on the outskirts of Toronto, to a kitchen in a suburban home where an idea was hatched. An idea fueled in equal parts by big dreams and the latest rejection letter from a top graduate school. What if, instead of joining the long procession of young leaders with big dreams into the classroom, and then with newly minted piles of debt into jobs that don't line up, I instead go out and create my own education. The idea was to challenge the status quo on the way we create change and build our journey uncovering the skills it takes to address today's complex social challenges. Now, before you roll your eyes at the idea of yet another young millennial with big dreams and a strong but perhaps naive conviction to create change, I'm an engineer with a business strategy background, and I know that you can't just quit your job, travel across the world, design your own master's program. At least I know that you can't do all of that alone. 2 weeks later, I turned to the internet. I put out a website, a call for applications. Apply now for the Designers of Tomorrow Fellowship, 1-year program, a chance to build your own education, build a portfolio, and immerse in emerging market context. And I wait. My first applicant rolled in from Montreal, and then there was an applicant from San Francisco. Soon, there was an applicant from Korea. And 27 applications later, and many, many awkward conversations on the phone of talking about, actually, the fellowship doesn't really exist yet. I somehow convinced 6 exceptional strangers to quit their jobs and move to India with me on the simple belief that together we had what it would take to learn new things and uncover the new skills required to create change in our world. Through a few more interviews, a lot more soul searching, I decided to work with Chris. Chris at the time was working in rural Uganda, trying to understand why social innovations fail. Perhaps it was this openness to failure that helped my pitch to move from Africa to India land so well with Chris.
Now, don't worry. I thought she was crazy too. But as one normally does when given the chance to move across the world to take on a risky, unproven project with a Canadian that they just met online, I said, let's give it a go. So we quickly got to work. We began by defining our learning goals. We then found project partners, and we found mentors from academic institutions. And in the fall of 2016, we took off for Delhi. Now, see us in Delhi, and there we were, 2 strangers, 7,000 miles from home, 12 unproven months ahead of us, and big dreams, even bigger doubts. But for us, our appetite for change was greater than our fear. Now, our first days in India weren't easy. The context was complex and unfamiliar. The work really felt new. And each day brought a wave of ambiguity and uncertainty that we had to deal with. But week by week, we began to define and evolve a custom education for ourselves. We did self-designed assignments to begin to learn, and we grounded that learning in practical field experiences where we took on challenging social challenges in the field. It was in those early days, amidst that beautiful chaos, that we learned our first big lesson on change. Change starts when we stop waiting for permission. Each of us has the power to begin working on the challenges facing our world right now. And very quickly, we learned our second big lesson on change, which is the voices at the front lines are uncovering a new curriculum for change. Just because we don't need permission doesn't mean it's easy.
And it wasn't easy. We learned that today's complex and deeply human challenges require a theoretical grounding, a much more rigorous theoretical grounding than we had known. When we first started, we came in with a hypothesis that we would need to start with studying and practically deploying new problem-solving approaches that were much more creative, collaborative, and human-centered. And so we set off on our first big project with our field guides, our big stack of Post-it notes, and our fancy frameworks. And in our first project, the intention of the first project was to actually uncover and understand how household work holds women back from the opportunities to invest in themselves, their communities, and their families.
Now, after 15 weeks of field research, we produced a menu of clear insights and design provocations. But we also uncovered something else, which was a newfound respect for the complexity of the systems surrounding the challenges. And it was a realization that our frameworks and our tools need to be paired with a fundamental grounding in theory. And this was the kind of realization that really only comes from building trust over dozens of cups of milky chai, comes from running into neighbors while shopping for groceries in local shops. It comes even in that odd moment of hanging your underwear out to dry.
The village was our home, and it was because of the immersion and the depth of immersion that we had within the village was the reason that we were able to get to the depth of the new tools and the actual theoretical grounding we required. Consistently over our time here, we found ourselves referencing back to theories of behavioral sciences, business, development economics, engineering, and our work was only supported because of the depth of those theories. One other thing that we realized in this village was that the first place we typically look for answers doesn't have to be the place where it always should. We started by spending a lot more time in the main square of the village, where the men and traditionally loud voices typically hang out. Here, admittedly, it was much easier to listen to the voices. There was less translation, less facilitation required. But over time, as we developed new research skills and we got better at our work, we started to incorporate new, quieter voices like Pravina, who's a hardworking mother of two. And it was through Pravina that we uncovered that the smallest voices actually make the biggest contributions to change. And we saw this again and again, not only in Nadi, but in all our work beyond, where we realized that change happens when we give agency to the quietest voices and we unlock their contributions into the work of development. We also learn how these small voices are unlocking the potential of other individuals around the world. When we met Carrie Ann is actually leading a project for 16 and 17-year-olds focused on helping them understand their role in shaping democracy in the US and enabling change in the electoral process.
We also see it through our friend Savita, who is a private school teacher from the village of Nadi, where we lived. Savita, each day, she's 22, she's unmarried, and each day she goes to a nearby city to teach. This not only challenges gender norms within her home, it actually breaks down barriers for other young girls in rural areas to pursue meaningful work outside of the home as well. And Savita is actually leading a movement of changemakers in her own community.
When we see these stories happen all around us, we really believe in the everyone and changemaker world. We believe that change is being created not only in the boardrooms in New York City, but in communities like Nadi and everywhere in between. And we believe stronger than ever that the smallest voices do in fact create the most meaningful contributions to change.
And we know that we're not alone.
As we think about being in an everyone and changemaker world, I actually start to think about where our own story started. We had thought, when we talked earlier about our story starting with big dreams, it actually had started with rejection. So let me explain. A couple years ago, I had actually wanted to get smarter at looking at how we use design to influence change in the world. And as I looked to apply to graduate schools in that program, turns out that grad schools actually don't let you in without a design portfolio.
And I was in a similar place. I was applying for jobs that use creative tools to do social impact work. But with my background, what I quickly found is that those companies weren't hiring people like me.
So here we are where we live, on one hand, in an everyone and changemaker world, and at the exact same time, a world that's always told us we need permission to create change. And the DOT project for us really started as a response to that paradox.
But we know that we're not alone. And we know that DOT project was more than a one-time experiment. It was part of a larger movement of change leaders like yourselves who are taking their education personal. And this is a movement that's committed as well to unlocking the potential of those quiet voices. And it's a movement that we are all part of.
There's more work to do, and we're no longer waiting for permission to do it.
Thanks.